me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Good afternoon, everybody. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. Today with Mike Block. Look, this is awesome. Mike Block, who, in addition to the millions of other things that he is doing, will be in Wisconsin for our UW Whitewater Cello Day on March 8th, about which I know my students and plus past Cello Day attendees, etc., are super, super excited. And I know they'll also be excited to watch this and just hear more about kind of the backstory to your extraordinary career. And that's just even so far. Who knows what's coming down the pike? It's exciting to see. I mean, I had no idea about this 3D printer cello that we'll get to in a little bit. Like, whoa. But at any rate, how are you doing, Mike?
I'm well. Thank you, Benjamin. I'm happy to be a part of this cello community and get to meet everybody in March.
Excellent, outstanding. So I always start by asking people kind of what's their story, how they get started on the cello in the first place. And I also want to ask you, I mean, in case you weren't going to throw this in the story anyway, but a lot of people who go to, kind of the traditional Juilliard, for example, end up auditioning for orchestras or being in a quartet or something like that. And so I'm kind of curious along the way, at what points you knew you wanted to play non-traditional music, you wanted to play standing up, you wanted to play world music, you wanted to compose, you wanted to sing and play at the same time. So can you tell the evolution, how did you get started on the cello and how did you get started being Mike Block?
Well, I'm still figuring that last one out. My family is all Western classical musicians. So my dad is an orchestra conductor, and he's still active as the director of orchestras at Illinois State University. My mom used to teach French horn, and my siblings and I all started on Suzuki violin. So, learning Western classical music, as far as I can see, was not something I would have ever have been able to avoid. And so music was always a part of my life. And um, I think my first act of rebellion or, self-direction, one could call it, was when I asked my parents, my older brother and my younger sister, we were all in Suzuki violin together. And when I was 9, I asked if I could switch to cello. Ironically, one of the big reasons was I wanted to be able to sit down when I practiced, which my parents wouldn't let me do on violin. And my dad, I remember he was supportive at the time. He's like, "Oh, I know a good cello teacher in the area that we should reach out to." So that was my first step, which was like, "Oh, I don't want to play the same instrument as my siblings. I want to play cello and play this incredible low sound that as a small child, like I couldn't create any other way." So I was captivated by the low C string and the ability to sit down. I started playing cello, and yeah, so I mean, I had a pretty standard classical, upbringing in that sense, growing up in the Kansas City area, and I got a teacher from the symphony, and then later. In high school, I studied with Carter Enyart, who was at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and honestly, I would credit Carter for helping me not only organize my playing and start practicing scales for the first time, but also to give me a little bit of more focus as I slowly decided that yes, I am going to audition for colleges. Yes, I am going to try and pursue music as my profession, which I wasn't entirely sure of as a kid. I thought maybe I wanted to be an architect for many years. And so the decision to commit to cello, I didn't really make until the summer before senior year, when it was really make or break for, focusing on auditions. And then, so I did luckily get into Richard Aaron's studio at the Cleveland Institute of Music, where I started my undergrad. And I was really excited to be told that everything I was doing was wrong, and that there was a new way that would make my life better. So Richard changed my life in a lot of great ways. But my middle years in undergrad were difficult for me. And I don't know, how many people have felt like quitting, but I did. Um, and I think ultimately, I think what one of the things that drives me is an unhealthy need for novelty and exciting new things. And when you're learning cello, like every piece is a new world, and you're constantly getting to learn a new concerto, or getting to learn Bach suites for the first time. And I think that kept me going, even though I definitely had like music that I like to listen to for fun that was not classical music. Um, and so then in college, I started, working really hard and practicing unsustainable amounts of hours. And it was still very exciting. But in the middle years, I started realizing, you know what? I've already learned all the six Bach cello suites, and there are only five Beethoven sonatas. And wouldn't you know it, Richard has already made me learn all 40 Popper etudes. And so then I started kind of sending some energy to contemporary music, which seemed like a potentially limitless path to send some energy. And it was just, I was just struggling. And I was struggling to stay passionate about the things I was working so hard at. And then I had a few, experiences and glimmers of like actually like improvising and jamming with somebody else at school who was more experienced in that. And essentially, I like, it was junior year of college. I started attempting to compose and improvise, and I found another cellist who was an incoming freshman who had some experience. So I had someone to play with and to explore with, and that was a game changer. So by the time I finished CIM, I had tasted this creative bug, and I knew I knew I had some new feelings that I could find with music, this creative energy, this collaborative energy. And for better or for worse, I knew that I wasn't finding that. Well, I knew that I liked that feeling more. And I also realized I wasn't finding that feeling in most of the traditional paths for a cellist, such as orchestra or even quartet playing. And I never actually was under any delusion that a soloist's life still existed, let alone for me. Um, and so, I was at a juncture graduating from undergrad where I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew very clearly I did not want to play classical cello in the way that I saw it and understood it, at least. But this is where I become a cautionary tale instead of a role model. Because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I decided to keep doing what I was supposed to do. So even though I knew in my heart and head that I didn't want to be a classical cellist, I still auditioned for grad schools because I didn't actually have an idea of what other path I could be on. And in retrospect, if I was to give myself a break, it was that there was obviously something in music that kept me in. And even though I wasn't finding it, there was some idea that it was there and that I could find it. And so I didn't give up music, even though I might have mid degree. But I did end up going to Juilliard for graduate school. And what was great, apart from having supportive teachers there, Joel Krosnick and Darrett Atkins, who were very, very sweet and supportive of my interests. New York City, holy moly, had all sorts of opportunities for me to experiment playing cello in rock bands and other things that at the time Cleveland did not. So moving to New York, in addition to going to Juilliard itself, was incredibly meaningful and helpful for me to just get more experiences and figure out what I loved. And I kept composing and kept joining bands. And so even while I was in school, I mean, my master's degree was kind of hilarious because I was joining rock bands and like lugging guitar amps across New York City, and then like trying to catch the crosstown bus in time to like make it back in time for orchestra rehearsal at Lincoln Center. So I was definitely living a double life that was kind of, it was just hectic. But I was finding satisfaction in a lot of non-school related, performance opportunities. And so basically, that path was me just desperately searching for this feeling that for whatever, like the feeling that I look for even now is this idea that I could be completely myself and completely invested in the music I'm playing. And it doesn't have to be mine. Like I love doing collaborations where it's half mine and half somebody else's. But this idea that I'm bringing my full self to the table is, for better or for worse, a feeling that I have more consistently found in non-classical styles, where it's not all through composed and there's some flexibility for performers to bring some more individual elements. And I think ultimately, part of that, I know this is a long answer to your question, but it was a big question. I think, there's a really healthy appreciation in the classical community for like the amazing creativity of like the great composers. And I think there was like a small part of me that, I felt like I had been told to respect and admire these great composers my whole life, but nobody was asking me to do what they did. Like I wanted to be engaged in the creative process, like all these great composers I was, studying. And so for me, the classical mindset of being an interpreter of music, and we are like, the reason I like to joke, the reason classical musicians have jobs is because Bach and Beethoven, the way they wrote music needs interpreting. Like, you can't just like read the score and get the effect. So the idea that different musicians can interpret that music differently is that's the job of a classical artist. And for whatever reason, I was more interested in the creative process than in the interpretive process, and that has just consistently brought me outside of classical music to get those outlets. And so that path, I was just constantly searching and trying to find a feeling where I could be more invested in the music that I was, more personally represented, even, where it wasn't the composer's voice I was manifesting, but my voice. I wanted to know what my voice was. And then it was in school, like while I was at Juilliard, I got two jobs. Basically, I joined Mark O'Connor's Appalachia Waltz Trio right as I was graduating. And I also started playing with the Silk Road Ensemble, which Yo-Yo Ma started. And so what essentially, like the way that I met Yo-Yo and the Silk Road Ensemble was I was a student in a workshop they did, kind of right as I was starting graduate school. And it was an incredible life-changing week. And then, half a year later, they asked me if I would go on tour to Japan. And so here I was struggling to find my passion as a classical cellist. And in between my first and second years of graduate school, I was sitting next to Yo-Yo Ma on a Japanese tour in the Silk Road Ensemble. And I knew deeply that I did not belong there and that I was not ready for that. And the only reason I was there was because of all of the non-classical things I was doing. That's why I was interesting and valuable to Yo-Yo and to that ensemble. And so it was an early stamp of validation that the path I was on was going to take me further than if I was doing what my teachers told me. And so that was huge for me to get those opportunities, to attempt to live up to those opportunities. And so basically ever since college, through both professional and educational experiences, I've just never stopped learning, trying to learn more musical languages and get more comfortable so that I can, communicate and interact with more artists and with more audiences and figure out more of who I am in the process and kind of, going down, that this path that at some point just diverged completely from anything my teachers had ever asked me to do. And then here I am now getting to talk to you about it.
That's excellent. That's outstanding. Okay, I want to follow up on a couple of those. So the singing, you got started in singing as a process of being in the various rock bands and like, hey, join in, harmonize here, and gradually more and more. Is that true?
Yeah, I am historically a horrible singer. And even in my sight singing class in school, my voice would crack in such a hilarious way that even my teacher would laugh at me. All
Aw.
that I don't have a naturally expressive and good singing voice, but when I was in bands, I was singing harmony and realizing, I could sing as bad as these untrained singers. And so I started writing songs, and for me, that's been a long time and very important part of my creative process, because so much of what cellists do musically is a part of a group. Whether even if it's just sonata, but quartet, orchestra, concerto, whatever it is, whatever we're practicing is always an incomplete portion of a musical experience. And for me, songwriting has been so satisfying because here I, by myself, can craft and choreograph a complete musical experience between the voice and the cello, uh, and like have an interaction between characters, just essentially without needing anybody else. And like I was always jealous of pianists because I feel like they're able to make such larger musical decisions while they're practicing than a cellist, because we're always collaborating with other people. So the songwriting for me was always a way to explore my own creative voice in and of itself. But then I was immediately struck by this issue of, oh, I am a horrible singer. This is difficult. And so over time, I've taken some vocal lessons and tried to take my vocal routines as seriously as my cello routines, so that I can be expressive and lead a concert, with vocals. And I just played a concert. What's today? Today, yeah, like 4 days ago, I played a concert for a singer songwriter series, which had never had a cellist, obviously. But here I am, like playing a whole concert of all original songs, and it's not something I get to do actually that often. Even my own solo shows are a mix, as we'll see in March, a mix of instrumentals and songs. But for me to develop that side of my creativity has always been really important.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Now, so I'm trying to think from my students' perspective, for example, the things that scare, maybe terrify some of them. And one of them, it was one of our themes of not too many years ago, cello day of singing and playing at the same time. And you know, some of them, it took a fair amount of time to get over the fear of doing that. And another thing along those lines is improvisation. Sometimes a student will try it once, twice, three times, and if they're not sounding brilliant after about the third or fourth time, they think it's not for them or something. So like either just again from your own journey or from the way that you teach in your camp and such, do you have some, I mean, I know again, this is another big question, but just like general principles to
Mhm.
help students keep an open mind about improvising as part of their practice.
Yeah, I understand that that this is scary potentially, but everybody improvises every day in their native language. So you and I are improvising right now in English because we have a command of the language and we know a bunch of words that we can draw on. And so I think uh, part of the journey of becoming a better improviser is like building your vocabulary of phrases and chords and scales that you can access without notation. Obviously, it's all by ear instead of by sight. And so the good news is that anybody can get really good at it. The bad news is it takes time. But I view it like a language. Like, you could be a nuclear physicist, Nobel Prize winning, scientist who grew up, in Long Island. But if you go to France and you don't speak French, like you're not going to have a lot to offer. You're going to be lucky if you can ask where the bathroom is. And so for me, like for anybody who's incredibly well trained in like classical cello, one of the barriers to improvisation is that we're often immediately entering into another style of music. Every style of music is a different language. The language of bluegrass is different than the language of jazz, which is different than the language of Arabic music or rock music. And so what we often find ourselves doing is trying to improvise in a language, in a style that we don't actually know very well. And so that's where you want to give yourself permission to sound bad, which is also hard for people with Western classical training, to because we're used to a certain quality of sound emanating from our hands, and when we improvise, we feel limited, and even the things that come out maybe aren't up to our own standards, and that's where people might feel, less than inspired, or also just we don't want to look bad, right? Um, but it does take like you have to give yourself the permission to sound like a child when you're speaking a new language, and musically that is applicable here as well. The good news is, for people that'll come in March, like there are ways that we can practice this and get better. And what I've found is people with classical training and a passion for getting better at improvisation can actually improve incredibly quickly, because often the physicality of our instrument is not an obstacle. And so if you remove the physicality of our instrument as an obstacle, we're really just engaging with the concepts. And so then the barrier becomes like our Western classical training is largely eye-hand coordination. Not only are we reading pieces, even pieces that we've performed 100 times, we might still have the sheet music in front of us. But not only that, I myself have done hours of scale routines by sight from a book, right? So even the way we get to know our instrument is by sight. All this to say that that is literally using a different part of the brain than when we play and learn by ear. So the by ear part of our brain is different than the by sight part of our brain. And even when our hands can do amazing things, to access information from the by ear part of our brain, like you have to put the information in there before you can access it from that side of the brain. So that's why, like, simply learning tunes by ear and improvising a little bit every day, that like inputs all of this material into that side of the brain that then you can access, by ear.
Very nice, very nice. And for you, even what style of music do you not play? I mean, the world music portion of it itself is another language, as you mentioned. How did you meet, for example, Sandeep Das and get that entire set of several recordings released with him too?
Sure. So Sandeep Das is a tabla player, in the North Indian style of music, Hindustani music. It's the same sort of a general bucket like Zakir Hussain, who's maybe the most famous classical Indian musician in the world, also plays tabla from the North Indian style. But Sandeep and I met in Silk Road Ensemble. He's been a long time, I think, founding member of the ensemble. And so he's worked a lot with Yo-Yo and in the ensemble, and he and I were just getting along, and we happened to both move to Boston at the same time. He moved from New Delhi to Boston, and I moved from Brooklyn to Boston. And so we did what anyone would do. We started a cello tabla duo. I was lucky enough that here Sandeep, this world-class musician, is moving to a new country with his family and needed some gigs. And so I was there to scoop him up while he had a lot of availability. And now we've played as a duo for over a decade. And we just played a show together, just a couple days ago. And so he's coming from a rhythmic tradition and a musical universe very different than what I grew up in. And I think, to his credit, one thing he thought when we started playing together is like, Mike, like there are melodic instruments in Indian music. There's even Indian violin traditions, largely from the southern style of Indian music. But anyway, he's like, Mike, don't try and play Indian music just because I play tabla. Let's find something new together. And so our show is full of music from around the world. And yes, we play some Indian music and some Nepalese music that draws directly on his traditions, but we also play American fiddle tunes and Arabic tunes and a lot of original music that we've written together. And so all this to say, he like the desire to play and find new things with people. Like, you will find like-minded people, like, there are plenty of amazing musicians who come from different styles that might have zero interest in playing with a cellist at all, because a cello is not traditional in a lot of styles. And so what I've found is, because I'm looking to leave my style of origin, I'm often connecting with other people who are open to leaving their style of origin and meeting in the middle or finding new ground together. And so what I've really appreciated about that is, I'm able to learn a lot from Sandeep's tradition, but also, like, I'm not in a position where what I play is simply going to be wrong and inappropriate, but we can find something new. And Sandeep specifically has helped me, although a lot of non-classical styles have improvisation and spontaneity. But in as Sandeep has explained to me, in the Hindustani Indian classical tradition, this is like also, the sitar that Ravi Shankar plays, like he was from this same world, and it's so improvisationally focused. And actually, Sandeep told me that, well, he hates rehearsing. Um, and he said that in Indian classical music, it's supposed to be improvised, and the spontaneity is how you show your value and your skill. And he said when something sounds rehearsed,
Yeah.
it's an insult.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
means you weren't able to come up with something on the spot, but you had to plan it. And so that mindset is just so different than what I grew up with in the Western classical, interpretive thing where you're choreographing with people. So working with people like him has helped raise my tolerance for spontaneity and the idea. Like now, no matter who I'm playing with, I embrace the mindset that I want to be able to walk out on stage and not actually know what's going to happen. And that is such a shift in mindset from,
That
but I
is.
realize that I enjoy that mindset a lot. And that's something that I never experienced in the same way, in normal cello settings.
That's great. That's really great. Uh, well, I'm thinking about other artists who are really into collaborating. Elvis Costello. I'm not terribly big fan of his voice. I like yours vastly, vastly more. But I have all of his CDs because it's so interesting to hear him pair with
Yeah.
the string quartet and with Burt Bacharach and everything like that, and keep meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
So more power to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit, if I may, about both the block strap and the 3D printer cello.
Sure.
That the strap, to me, again, it's one of those things. I bought one for the studio a number of years ago, and I have, everybody, hey, let's give this also an honest try. And some people love it, and some people not as much. But
Sure.
it seems it's almost like, how there's the standard setup. If you're sitting in a chair, the end pin, it just okay. Well, then let's adjust this. Let's adjust this. And I think the way that it fits on me is not necessarily lined up the same as when I'm sitting. And I certainly like those posture pegs so that
Yeah.
I'm not limited by where the peg is with respect to my neck. But I'm just like you said, since you first chose the cello in order to sit. So I mean, like how that first came about, and then just also in terms of because you have to have seen over the years a lot of people go from very skeptical about this thing to, oh my gosh, I play with it all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the block strap, as far as I know, the world's first intentionally designed strap to play standing with the cello. But I'm not the first person to do this, like to stand. There's a couple figures in non-classical cello that would put on either a guitar strap or a bass guitar strap on the instrument. There was a guy from many years ago from I think the Nashville area, Michael Cott, who has a fascinatingly minimal web presence. But he was playing cello with a guitar strap and going on skateboards back in like the 90s. And he's from like so Rashad Eggleston is a good friend of mine, and he was the person that really it was my primary inspiration for standing with the strap. Rashad Eggleston's a folk rock cellist, singer songwriter. He saw Michael Cott do it, and that's why he tried it. Rashad is very acrobatic and he moves around a lot on stage. I was never that kind of musician, so I thought, oh well, Rashad does it, but it's his thing. He's a lot, I don't want to say like he's not crazy. He's like brilliantly creative and unique. And I was like, you know what? I don't need to copy him because it's so personal for what he does. But I had hired Rashad to teach at my string camp in Florida, where of course he was playing with his strap and he was standing. And I had already been kind of like trying it out and be like, oh, I don't know if it's for me. It doesn't really feel comfortable, but that's cool, Rashad. You keep doing you. But then the moment that it all changed for me personally was he performed at a faculty concert at the Mike Block String Camp. And the very next morning, 3 high school cellists showed up with straps on their cello. And apart from wondering how in the world they even got straps that quickly, um, 2 things occurred to me. It was like, A, it's really cool that they were inspired by something and wanted to give it a try. And who am I to have some big identity of who I am that I'm unwilling to try this? And then B, I thought, well, maybe it's not just Rashad's thing. Maybe it's the next thing. And who am I, with everything I think I am, to be the conservative naysayer to what might be the next thing? So I did like 6 months after that, finally put one on my cello and give it a shot and realize this is really uncomfortable. I can't play any of the music I'm getting paid to play on this. But I thought I could figure this out. What if I started adding length here? What if I added a cushion here? And I started tweaking with what started as just a bass guitar strap. And I started trying to figure out if I could design it so that what you're describing, the seated position, if I could manifest that standing in a way that felt comfortable. And it took 2 years. And I played many a concert on a strap that was not comfortable. It even broke on stage once. Like, this risky business. I was like on tour going to hardware stores getting more rope and tape because I like needed to like try something. And it was a long 2 years of true experimentation, but it was with this idea that if I figure this out, it'll change everything for me. And by that time, I was already playing so much non-classical music that it felt worthwhile to not always be the only person on stage sitting down. I already knew how valuable the freedom could be if only I could dial in the design of the strap. So I don't know how long ago you got the strap. Maybe it's a version 1 strap, but right now we're selling version 3, and we're iterating. Every time I make more, I'm improving the design. And so I've at this point I've been doing the standing cello thing for almost 12 years. I've been selling them for almost 10 years. And for me, it's like I feel better performing standing than I do sitting. And there's a freedom that comes with it for me, and also just like an engagement. I feel more physically invested in the music. So that's been a really big part of my journey. Not that you have to stand up to be creative or to play other styles, but for me, the physicality, if it started to connect with what I was looking for artistically.
Excellent. Well, I will admit, I lost track over the years of how many of my cello students, for example, just come in and from the get-go, it's as though sitting in a chair, as though they don't even have legs or a lower half. You know what I mean? They're so static from the waist down. And like, hey, do we have to pretend that just because we're in a chair, we don't have our entire mass? And so some of those, it's fun to get them standing and playing. But I'll also confess that when I'm standing and playing, I'm more often thinking like either simpler repertoire, first position repertoire or something, but seeing you do the Kodai duo with the strap, I don't know that I'm there yet.
Well, like, I remember, being in college and still like being like, how long should my end pin be? Like, the length of time to dial in your setup as a sitting cellist, I remember still taking a long time. And so like it can take a while to dial it in perfectly standing. But there's, very specific sliders and cushions to choose from. But that for me was always a part of the plan, which was, for instance, Rushad, who I mentioned before, as like my big role model of what actively standing could look like. When he plays something virtuosic in the left hand sense, he sits down. And so
Okay.
it works great for songs and stuff. But I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I want to do it for everything. I don't want to have, I don't, I can't ask for a chair for certain pieces and whatnot. So I would practice proper etudes and I would use those professional opportunities like playing Kodai duo with Rachel Barton Pine on her, Guarneri violin and be like, okay, what do I have to do on this strap setup so that I can keep up and this isn't like, she doesn't have to babysit me, but like I can actually engage with her real. So it was those experiences that helped me really make sure basically I didn't want to make a strap that I wasn't willing to play anything on. And so that kind of walking the walk of what I was developing was part of the mindset of I want to be able to play everything on this, not just, Bach. Yeah.
Cool. Rachel actually is going to be our guest artist a month earlier, February 8th, for a Baroque Strings Day. So,
Oh, good.
2025, it's going to be a lot of fun. But so now the 3D printer cello, I was amazed at that at ASTA. And I mean, in some ways, I guess I don't know why I was as amazed as I was, because I played on, yes, I played on carbon fiber cellos, and it's like, okay, yes, wood, wonderful, spruce, maple, the varnish, yeah, wonderful. Big fan, big fan. But you get any material that's willing to vibrate, to resonate at the
Mhm.
frequencies we need it and in the amount that we need it to really project and just sound warm and boomy and everything. And it was a lot of fun to play on. So how did this come about?
Well, yeah. So what you're talking about is the Forte 3D cello, the world's first 3D printed professional level bowed instrument that I'm aware of. So there are obviously existing carbon fiber instruments that have been around for decades, and there's obvious logistical benefits to carbon fiber. It's just a durable material. Don't have to worry about weather, temperature, you know, dents or anything like that. But for what it's worth, I have, despite existing in the, dare I say, alternative cello community, I have never played a carbon fiber instrument that I liked and that I was willing, that like inspired me to bring it on stage. Um, and so I just, yeah, it was never a direction I had moved in, even though I had tried many. And I wanted to I was optimistic. But anyway, so this Forte 3D cello is actually being made by a friend of mine, Alfred Goodrich, and I met Alfred. I think the first time I met him is when he became a participant at my Mike Block string camp, my non-classical camp in Florida. He also was a participant at the Silk Road Global Musician Workshop that I direct. And so, I had engaged with him. He's an interesting, open-minded, stylistically cellist. And he's also a recording engineer with a successful studio in Philadelphia. So he's not a touring performing cellist in that sense, but he had this recording studio. His background is cello, and essentially, this was his big idea that he finally like followed through during the pandemic when his recording studio had to close. And so he got a 3D printer and started experimenting. And so when I encountered him just over a year ago, well, I had been in touch with him because I had seen that he was starting, to sell these instruments online, and I was intrigued. I know him, and I was just interested in what he was working on, and I was like, Alfred, when can I try one? And he finally brought me one just over a year ago, and he met me backstage at a show I was playing in New York City, and he brought me two. And he's like, well, try these, and whichever one you like the best, maybe that's the one you could keep, after the show. And I played like 30 seconds, and I was like, okay, this is the warmest, best sounding carbon fiber cello I've ever heard. What's going on? And what blew me away was not only that he had already gotten it to sound better than any other carbon fiber cello I had heard, but because he's using software instead of a mold, like most carbon fiber, like all other carbon fiber instruments are molded, because he was using software, he could keep tweaking the design every time he made one. So he was like, "Oh, well, I'm on the 42nd iteration of the ribs and the 28th iteration of the neck." And I just realized, with like truly, like in 5 minutes, if it's already this good and it can get better, I want to be engaged in this process. So essentially, I came on board to the company, which is Alfred plus friends, and I started like helping consult him on the instruments, and now, like, because he's hand assembling them, the body is printed and the neck is printed, but apart from those components, everything's hand assembled. The top and the back are glued on, fingerboard glued on. Like, it's not it's not that he can just press print at night and come back in the morning and there's a cello. It's the parts that are printed, and you can see the lines of the layers of the printing, and the body is printed separately from the neck, and then geared pegs and a bridge. All these things have to be put on, and so all this to say, he's still physically hand assembling these instruments from the 3D printed designs that he continues to tweak. And so now my role now in the company is I'm helping guide the development of the instruments, and then like I'm out there teaching and performing and can actually be the one to tell people about them. And so that's when you caught us at ASTA, was right at the beginning of us partnering. Because I was already going to be at ASTA for my camp and for my strap. And I was like, hey, Alfred, why don't you come join my booth and we can tell people like Benjamin Whitcomb that exists. And so Alfred actually he just stayed at my house 2 nights ago, and we did a big consulting day with our luthier consultant here in Boston, and then we had a bunch of musicians help us try out the instruments and give us some feedback. And we also I'll plant the seed, we were prototyping and trying out some new violin designs. So, I believe in the potential of this, because the ability to continue evolving the design feels very organic to me, where like much like a wooden instrument, like you can try things here like as you go. And so for me, that process of just continued, experimentation. Like if it sounds better with the F hole 1 millimeter further out, well then let's try that. And then suddenly every cello is going to have that moving forward. So I can say even the Forte 3D cellos you tried in March are not as good as the ones we're making now, because we actually changed the filament. We're using a filament from a different company and a slightly different mixture over the summer. And then we were also trying to fight wolves in the instrument. Like even great Italian cellos, sometimes the better the resonance of the cello, the worse the wolf.
Yeah.
And we were encountering that. And so Alfred had gotten rid of some of the wolves by making the back of the cello a little thicker. It kind of like changed the resonance, so the wolves weren't as bad, but the sound wasn't as powerful. So then another big design breakthrough this summer is what if we keep the backs thinner, but like add some weight just in a very specific wolfy area, so we can kill the wolf but keep the resonance. These are the kinds of conversations Alfred and I are having. And so enough changes actually happened over the summer that we're actually thinking of the cellos we're selling now as V2. And so even from what you tried in March, we would say, well, they're better now. But that idea is like, I want to keep saying that every year forever. But the truth is, the whole purpose of that company is Alfred's also able to make these instruments and sell them for less than half of what a lot of other carbon fiber instruments are selling for. So to me, it's a real accessibility game changer. And I've played every concert since late February this year on a Forte 3D cello. And so I can like the strap. If I can walk the walk and say this is a professional level instrument for $3,000, like to me, that's not something that I've ever seen before.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. And talk about accessibility, because you don't have to go that far back in time when, there'd be a student who, if their family didn't have the means to get any better than a certain, it's like, well, do the best you can, but it's great when it able to get and across the board, it's great to see these advances being made at an
Mhm.
affordable price. But this is a huge, I think this one's also got a ton of ability to fill in that needed
Yeah.
gap. So that's very cool. I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
One of them, again, this is somewhat with for myself and somewhat with my students in mind, the outreachy things that you feel a calling to do. So that's the play for the vote, and
Yeah.
there's the outreach component that the Silk Road has, and there was a what was another thing I was trying to think of? The Gala, Brooklyn, Global Art, Local Art.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
These aren't the sorts of things that you just go, oh, well, in my spare time, I'm going to do these sorts of things. You have to feel a calling for this as well. So I'm wondering, can like what is it that you feel personally as a mission to try to take music and music's power to wider and wider people?
Um, yeah, I mean, well, I can speak maybe first to play for the vote because I just spent a huge amount of spare time on it this year specifically because Play for the Vote is a nonprofit organization that I started. And what I learned is that it's incredibly time consuming to start a nonprofit organization, but the mission is that we want to improve the voter experience, the election experience in America, and inject some positivity into the conversations
Good luck.
around the voting process. And the way we do that, we believe in the power of music to bring people together. So we organize musical performances at polling locations throughout the country. And so obviously we had a big year, and a lot of energy went into that. And that particular project was my pandemic pivot. We started in 2020 when I had nothing better to do. And I knew that every musician I knew did not have a gig that conflicted with election day because there were no gigs. And so this was our first big test in, dare I say, a normal environment to see if we could still, engage musicians and everything. And it went great. But that's an example. Well, I mean, the problem with some of the things you've like, it's great to like take our music to places where it's needed, and it's doubly great when there is funding to support energy and time to do so. Play for the Vote is an example of something I just did because I thought it needed to happen. And in 2020, it was all volunteer. There was no funding. Like I lost money because I had to pay for stuff, and but the purpose of the nonprofit was to attempt to get support in an official way. So it's not that it's like a part of my like income, but now I can actually pay other people to do the work that I don't, I'm not able to in that sense. But um, I think that the maybe the reason why I find myself following through on those ideas, as you're saying, it doesn't just happen, is something that I learned from music and kind of where we started this conversation of my own journey, which is that I realized nobody was going to ask me to do the thing that I really wanted to do because nobody knows what I really want to do unless I show them by doing it. So nobody was asking me to improvise. Nobody was asking me to compose or play with tabla players from India. Um, and so this idea that nobody's going to offer you your dream job because you have to show them what your dream job is by doing it. And so I have found artistically and musically that nobody's going to pay me to do what I want to do unless I'm already doing it.
Mm.
Uh, and so I think that mindset of like, oh, yeah, I would like to start a camp. I should just do that. And then figure out how to make money with it. And I think Play for the Vote started the same way, which is like, oh, this should happen. I should do that. And then after I did it, I was like, okay, I need some help. But this idea of you know I nonprofit organizations are a specific thing, but the cello and the strap are businesses essentially, right? And the purpose of business is to make good action sustainable. To me, like, figure out how to make money with something is like the way to be able to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And so um, then the first question is and always, well, what do you want to be doing? What's worth doing? And so that's a question that everybody's asking themselves all the time. And artists, we have to ask ourselves, do I want to be taking this gig because it pays, or because I believe that I want to play this music, or I want to do this outreach? And so I think, for better, for not everything I've done has ever, it doesn't always lead to money. But I think underlying Play for the Vote was just sort of like, what, I've lived my whole life asking the first question of what do I think is valuable to be spending my energy on, and then figuring out how to support it later. Like, I could say, like, I turned down decent, real classical concert opportunities when I was younger so that I could be a student at a camp and learn non-classical music. And it was like an investment, like, well, I'm able to do this, and somebody will pay me now to do this, but actually I want to be doing this, so I have to invest. So it's just a mindset of what's the long-term vision. And essentially, I'm sure most musicians and cellists can relate to the idea that making any decision based on the money is usually not the best way to make that decision. Otherwise, we wouldn't be cellists. But the Play for the Vote just kind of happened, and before I knew it, it got out of control, and a lot of people cared about it, and I realized I couldn't let it die, and so here I am, still kind of doing it. But it was a really meaningful election season this year, but yeah, a bit of a distraction from my normal performing and educational activities. Yeah.
All right, all right. I love that. I think the outreach component is, so many of these things. I think this has already been just chock full of the sorts of things that the young folks in my studio, and hopefully everybody else hearing, needs to hear about willingness to take risks, and to you're like, I'm trying to remember your quote from early on, that you just had you called it like an unhealthy desire for new. You know what I mean? But that's curiosity, you know?
That's a nicer way to put it. Yeah.
All right. So the last question, I mean, and I'm sure that this could be a very long list, as busy as you are. Upcoming concerts, events, what do you have coming down the pike?
Tomorrow, I'm playing a concert for Silk Road at Harvard, and it's a trio with a balafon player from Mali in West Africa and a Latin jazz electric bass player. Then next Tuesday, I'm collaborating with the great global percussionist Jamie Haddad. And he and I are, well, basically, I started the Global Music Ensemble at my alma mater, Cleveland Institute of Music. So I'm going back there for a couple of days to work with the students, put together some global music. And Jamie has been helping teach them while I'm out of town. So he and I will do first half of the concert will be a duo, cello and percussion. If it's any consolation, I do not know yet what we will be performing on Tuesday. We have yet to trade tune ideas, but then we'll work with the students, and then that's it for the year for me. And then second week of January, I'm recording a new album with a trio of mine called Biribá Union, which is the trio I got to perform with at Asta. So it's cello and vocals, a beatboxer who also raps and plays guitar, and a electric bass player from Uruguay. So we're going to be recording all original material that we wrote together in early January.
Wow. Wow. I
And
look
then
forward
on
to,
March 8th, on March 8th, I get to go to
yes,
Chile at University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
again, that's just going to be so looked forward to and counted down to by a lot of people in this region. That's going to be fun. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This has been fabulous visiting with you and so inspiring and fascinating hearing these the stories and the ins and outs of your career path. Fascinating career path.
Well, I appreciate your interest and very much looking forward to having some time together in the same room for
That'll be
cello.
great. That'll be great. All right. Well, so everybody out there, happy practicing all week, and we'll meet back up this same time next week. Take care.
You had me at Jello.